I think we may want to keep it around, but we've done it through, well, we've got the degree, and also we might be at our next steps. So, what I've done is, we've got a slide who just summarizes some of the sort of key aspects. I think the first thing is, that we will get the presentations and the slides accessible, except for those very reserved to one or two speakers. I think one of the speakers are a little bit anxious about having a presentation on YouTube, but I think most people are quite happy. So basically, they will be up, they will be accessible on the Share Alliance website over the next fortnight. James and Nick will be sorting that out very quickly to be done on that. Meanwhile, Tina, the excellent Tina over here, will be producing a report on the conference, and that will be published as well on the website. We're really looking forward to that. Tina, I think you're all around that much, is that right? And it'll be roughly what's the risk of length and what's expected to be. You know, so well, I think roughly, what would nice 10 page report line.
One section for each speaker and one section that links everyone's topic together around the key topic of intergenerational rebalancing, something like that, a conference receipt.
Thank you very much. I think that's fine. So we'll look forward to seeing that. That will be available from the Share Alliance website as well. Heloise, I think, is actually left something just now, but she is going to bring together a podcast series on Stop the Data and Create Interview. And hopefully, with maybe an online conference looking at some of the potential people we can talk with next in terms of both companies, so regulators, to see what we can do to move that forward. So that will be really good. We're looking at greater depth of people involving from capital economics. And once the says here the UK government is showing signs of stabilising, it's just like a great slide. It seems a lot more unstable rather than more stable. However, once that is happening, then we will be doing more work to deliver both the current Child Trust funds and also the Child Trust Fund Mark II. And we'll work on how best to prepare global intergenerational rebalancing as we be partnered with international media and philanthropists. So that's just some of the sort of thoughts that I've got to be with. But as it says, a lot of other ideas will be very welcome. I think I've been particularly grateful if you've got those ideas and discuss them just now. So over to you. There's a couple of lights in the middle here, so we should be able to get on. Eric, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, so just during the break, Professor Heckman it had a view that, I guess maybe the next steps are to think about what does this portfolio of policies look like that we should be considering as a society. I think you said it much more eloquently.
Well, you said what I said, so leave it to the group to decide the elements. So there was one issue that I felt a little strange about the balance of the rebalancing. I mean, we're dealing with a full life cycle of children, and starting from the earliest age to the oldest age. That was the spectrum that was really considered today. So I fully appreciate that, and I learned a lot personally from the discussion of the British situation. I hadn't realized how dramatic the change had been in the status of the two older and younger generations related to the change in the way pensions were being administered. And many of the other institutional changes in Britain, especially the wage structure. I'd seen work with Richard Blundell. But I felt it was a little odd in the emphasis today on so much about technology and AI and the idea that somehow this whole question that came up about ownership of data, I mean, I had a remark that I wanted to make, but I'll make it now since most people are gone. I mean, the person I was directing it to is gone, so she won't be too offended. But I thought, in some sense, you say, well, should we tax Tolstoy for writing War and Peace? Because he drew on the data of the Russian people. I mean, there was a history, there's a lot of data. I mean, we draw on data everywhere. We're just always making observations about the world. So I didn't understand the idea of data ownership. Do I own? I can't possibly own what you think of me or what the impression is that I make, or negative, positive, either way. So I felt it was very odd. That part I just didn't understand. But what I did feel too was that, well, it wasn't among the group of people, mostly economists, some economists, many of them economically motivated, there wasn't more of a kind of portfolio approach and saying, well, okay, we're interested in trying to further both the young and the old, rebalancing in ways. I didn't realize that serious change in the nature of the way the pensions were being structured, but thinking about where the best investments would be. And the best investments in terms of rates of return, where essentially the lives of everybody, we started all over again, not just, I mean, there are two issues here. One is taking the generation, as it says, certain groups were harmed, certain groups might want to be compensated in the short run. But if we started imagining starting all over again, or a society 50 years from now, where rules are now set in place and the older generation is gone, thinking about what appropriate policies would be in sense of investment, structuring, and so forth. And I wasn't sure that the priorities were so clear as they are, I think, from the literature about how human development occurs and the importance of skills, and even the question of financial management. And we think about financial literacy as a skill that we do acquire, but it's something that can be acquired and starting to be acquired at very early ages. So even though 13 and 17 is very important and neglected, the teenage years are neglected in the relative discussion inside academia, largely speaking, in economics. But still, the early years play a very important role. And if you look at rates of return on investment, you'd find very high rates of return in the earliest years that would have payoffs throughout the whole life cycle. And that's a rebalancing that would occur in some real sense. So for example, you look at, I've been studying over the years a program that was done years ago now in Michigan called Perry Preschool. But we follow the children in this early childhood program when they were age 3, and they got certain interventions that occurred. Many things having to do with engagement of parents in their lives and so forth and so on. But we follow these people into their mid-50s. So we have a full life cycle. So it's not like it was a randomized trial where we follow people for 50 years now, potentially. And we find the development of a whole set of skills, including skills related to resilience, skills related to what's called executive functioning, the ability to cope with change, the ability to actually learn, openness to experience. And so what we find is a large number of benefits that accrue across the life cycle, including elements having to do with health. See, some of the most surprising features that came out of the study were that kids who were in programs originally designed, this is starting in the 1960s, these programs. At one point, the notion was cognition was everything. Cognitive skills are everything. Cognitive psychology was dominant. And now we come to understand that the whole vector of skills, variety, social and emotional skills, I mentioned executive functioning, the ability to cope with change, but also self-control and matters having to do with the ability to stay on task and so forth. Those skills are produced by these programs that had lifetime consequences. Even in related programs, things that related to health where blood pressure was lower, you had the onset of diabetes was much lower among people who were in the treatment group versus the control group, even though the program was itself only focused on cognition. It was supposed to raise IQ, and it actually did. People say it faded out, but it didn't. But the measures used faded out, you might say. They just weren't adequate. But nonetheless, when we follow these people to age 55, it was real benefit. So I'm not saying it should be only early childhood. I think what's missing in the literature now is this a really full understanding of the benefits of each stage of the life cycle. And I
Yeah,
would
I
have
think
appreciated seeing that more. So people were sort of piecing out this, and housing issue is clearly an important question. It's affecting fertility, and it's an aspect of the wealth transfer issue. But I can't help but think, and maybe it's just my professional bias, and I'm willing to admit that I've worked on this a long time, and so I may have a professional bias. But I don't think it is a bias, that the skills that we create are the most important things in children, kind of the abilities to deal with that. That was your Carnegie. Carnegie disappeared today, from my standpoint, when we started talking about giving people. Because I thought there'd be a lot more objections to a Carnegie type objections today. But I would give them skills, because the skills have high payoffs.
Well, you know, I'm right on the side with the skills.
I know, but you were starting at 13, at 17.
No, I understand, but that's just the reality of working with young people in care. But
Well, no, and I'm not
Just mean
opposed to
today.
that. I think what's neglected, see, we're beginning to understand. I don't pretend to say I know everything about this or that everything is known even. I mean, but we do know that certain skills are certainly the prefrontal cortex, skills related to executive functioning in particular. Those skills, the onset of those skills really starts becoming very important in the teenage years into the early 20s. And so
Yeah.
the adolescent years are neglected, in fact. So I would say neglected. So it's great that you're doing it. But I would try to put it into more of a balance about the different ways we do these things. Where do we
No, I mean,
get?
I can understand that
So
completely.
that, but the housing, but the idea of wealth, wealth worries me, because it's like what I was saying yesterday, the wealth, where does the wealth come from? The wealth mostly comes from, it's not just the inherent. So, okay, there is this anomaly that certain cohorts did get a lot of gains in housing wealth, and so I agree with that. But over the life cycle and in a steady state, I think we're going to find much more of the skills are playing an important role than the transfer of wealth. But I do recognize that there's an unusual situation in Britain in particular about these growth, especially in London. It looks like huge housing wealth growing up. So that's, but I would try to separate out the kind of what I see as kind of temporary phenomena from the more basic long-term phenomena of where we would put our weight in terms of developing people and rebalancing and creating healthy and balanced lives over the whole life cycle.
Okay, I mean, there's two very big issues there. One of them is the relevance of the tech argument, the tech discussion.
Right.
The other one is about the early stages of the life cycle in particular.
See, the tech discussion, honestly, I didn't understand. Nobody.
Okay.
So I really honestly would go with Tolstoy. I think we should tax as a state and
Yeah.
redistribute it, get the rubber. We should give the money to Putin after we
No,
tax
no,
the
I
Tolstoy
understand.
estate.
But I'd like to ask everyone a question here. You know, I mean, we all sense that actually young people impacted much more by tech than the older generations. You know, they're the ones who are going to lose their jobs, who don't have.
No, we don't know
They
that.
are going to.
They are not.
They-
Those studies are nonsense. And you know why? No, this is bad economics because
Okay,
they're using a technology from the 1970s and 80s to describe a technology that will actually be driving the 2040s and 2050s. So they're
Okay.
doing, they're just, it's bad data applied in a very negative way. So Otter writes these papers saying, oh, AI can do this task and that. But Otter is not telling you, oh, what are the new tasks? What are the new jobs? What are the new things that will be created? And none of
Give
that
up my
there.
questions.
It's all a very negative image. This is
Gents, I
Luddite.
just put my question out. Is anybody researching this?
Yes, they are, but in different ways. They're looking at case studies, right? They're looking at their. And the fact is, it's going to be very difficult to use the traditional data that many I have an economist, I won't mention his name, a colleague of mine in Chicago, but he's always said, oh, we can't find any effect of AI in the data. But the trouble is he's looking at statistics that don't have AI in it for all practical purposes. And they ignore what AI can do and how it's expanded the economy. And so there are case studies like in Luxembourg, you know, Gensowski, Miriam Gensowski, and many others are doing this, but it's not the usual focus. So it's more like science fiction or case studies than the standard IO production function estimates.
We had the same debate in the 80s, and it's now known as the Sogel paradox, that you can see the computer age everywhere except the productivity statistics. That's a quote from 87.
That's what he said, but again, the same critique applied.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
We don't measure, I mean, the free digital services have no statistical finger.
Exactly, and this consumer surplus that came out of, that was another aspect of the stuff about
Trying to get in.
I just like to pick up Jim's point because, again, it's my class, but I think that the early childhood years, there's a hell of a lot of evidence. Now, there's even evidence from the IFS here about the British program called Sure Start.
Sure Start, yeah.
The Sure Start, very successful. It's been cut. Now, the present government has increased money to it, but it's not clear that the money is sufficient. And moreover, as I understand it, the return on investment of Sure Start is such that if you actually reduce public expenditure by spending money on it, right? So, in other words, it's an example of the type of public expenditure where there's clear evidence that it's not welfare payment, but an investment.
Right.
Now, I think the big challenge facing all this is actually, the challenge is to work out what are the priorities, which is what you're trying to talk about, and then how to get these priorities some consensus around, because you also need theory here. I think a sort of better theory than we've had so far. Because there are lots of reasons that I could give you for why something like Sure Start and the kind of Michigan project are going to work. Because even though people thought they were measuring or trying to impact cognitive things, they're actually doing other things, because actually you can't improve cognitive skills because we know cognition and affect go together now.
Oh, they go together, but you can't improve them.
Oh, yeah, I don't mean you can't improve, no, but I mean, if you're trying to improve one, you may well end up
for sure.
intentionally improving the other.
But you're making a very important point though, and that is that many of the people, when they think about these programs, or think about a policy, they want to improve this, they say, oh, we must have a curriculum for this, that, or the other thing. What's come out of it is that this kind of relationship, interaction between parent and child, the caretaker and child, produces a bundle of skills. None of it, it's not like it's a curriculum for being, for self-control per se.
Exactly.
And I think that's a danger that's built in. I think it's an academic danger, actually. We tend to say, okay, here, each skill must have some curriculum, but no, a bucket of skills. There was Horace Mann, famous American educator, was actually one of the earliest persons to evaluate public schools in the United States. He set up the common school model in Massachusetts in the 1840s. And he has a great line in one of his writings, which was, he was talking about how to evaluate the schools. And he said, reading, writing, and arithmetic is the least of what we teach in the public schools. And he's right. And these programs also, we're teaching a whole variety of aspects of aspiration, control, and then serving as models for the children and their future lives. So we should recognize this. It's a much richer notion of education than even the brick and mortar school. That's the other part, which is the family life. I did think got some neglect today relative to what we heard from yesterday in these talks. So Alina in particular was being very descriptive and important work showing the importance of the family structures. And we still need a lot more to do to understand that. But I would incorporate that. There is a way that government can, I'm not even sure it's government, all sources of the economy, but just to recognize what the root sources are and then devise policies based on that knowledge. Anyway, I've said it.
One thing that I don't think has been mentioned in the 2 days, but was mentioned to me by somebody who's now left, is the care system. I'm particularly thinking in this case of the elderly care. This is actually one area that would simultaneously benefit the oldest and the young. And that is that if a major reason why old people retain money until they die is the fear of having to pay out for 20 years in when you've got dementia and you're in a home. If that could somehow be solved, which would take state investment, even more state spending, even more money on the old, but it would also free that generation to pass on their wealth earlier than they're currently doing, although they are doing a lot, as is so many Bank of Mum and Dad deposits for generation below. In other words, I'm not so worried about the fact that the average age of inheritance might be 61. I'm more worried that the 61-year-olds definitely help if they can. They definitely help the next generation get on the housing better, but they don't help as much as they could if they didn't have to worry about what will happen if they get dementia.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah, Matthew, I think you have.
Yeah, I have a question for you, James.
Sure.
Quite a while ago, you had a paper on soft skills and non-cognitive skills.
Yes, exactly.
And you know, this early childhood intervention is not my area, but I work on social capital quite a bit. And social capital, I think of in terms of the trust we have in individuals, in
Trust,
business and government.
relationships.
Yes, ability to overcome collective action problems, these sorts of things.
Okay.
There's an element of social capital that's intrinsic to the individual. But a social butterfly on Mars has no friends.
Correct.
You have to have something to plug into.
Right.
These long-lived longitudinal studies that track people from the 50s and 60s, 70s, and 80s. The society into which those people plugged in is different from the society that we have now. If there was more social capital then, if people felt better connected to their communities, if politics were less divisive, does that affect the ability of these non-cognitive, so soft skills to help improve life chances?
Well, in principle, yes. I mean, I agree. You're making a good point that if in fact we live in a different environment, we produce skills that are no longer relevant. Well, I don't think that's what's happening. I do agree, though, that the society has changed. But remember, we're evaluating these people in the current society. So it's not like these people, these 50-year-olds we have are alive and well today. So it's not like we're doing this, this is not a study that's dead and buried. But I completely agree that
That's not what I was
social
trying to
skills,
imply.
you know, I understand. The social skills do matter a lot. And in fact, the relevance, I don't think the relevance of these individual traits to the formation of the social skills is in doubt. I mean, when we think about interpersonal skills, that's another dimension that I mentioned, the soft skill lines. In China, there's this term called guanxi, which has to do with sociability, right? And we actually measured guanxi in China in some of the studies we do it. And that plays a very important role in creating social relationships in China, and I think everywhere in the world. We don't think of guanxi in the US or in UK because we don't even know what it means. But now, I think increasingly we recognize these interpersonal skills. But there's still a lot more to be done. But I agree with social capital. But it builds also on the ability to have trust. So again, some of the studies that we're doing in China now include things like how trust and reciprocity, various forms of social skills, how those emerge and how they're affected. And I agree, the environment is such that it would modify the value of those skills. But I think if anything, they become greater. That's why, as a rule. So I think that I think is so. That's why I would argue we may understate it because the value, even of something like executive functioning, is greater. Think about it before in a manufacturing situation with an assembly line that was policing everybody and keeping, discipline. That was a very well developed device for keeping people on track, doing some of the assembly. I don't know if you ever worked on an assembly line. I have. If you do, if you screw up, the whole line shuts down and the social pressure is enormous. So you don't screw up and you can avoid it. But now we don't have that. We need much more of this kind of autonomy and ability to cooperate with others, but not necessarily be policed so tightly. And I think that the societies become more flexible in that regard, and those skills become more valuable.
So I just wonder, I mean, to a certain degree, what we're talking about in terms of these soft skills, are actually, again, approaching the impact of technology and AI. And, because social media effectively has resulted for a lot of young people in actually, isolating them and actually not giving the opportunity to communicate in the way that they have. Can I return to the question I just asked Paul? And everybody said, oh yes, this research is being done. Who is where is the research being done on the impact of technology on young people? I mean, who is doing it? Are we doing it at
No,
Cambridge?
there are
Where is
neuroscientists.
it happening?
No, there are plenty of neuroscientists. I was just at a conference in China a couple of months ago, where a large number of people were talking exactly about the effect of technology, the effect of social media, the effect on game. There's no doubt that learning, that all this work that was done years ago
Okay.
by this,
And
it's old work. Some of
would
it's
it be possible that if people are aware of it, they could let Eric know, and you know, and actually we can try and gather together kind of what the impact is, because in a way, that's the thing which actually explains why the convergence is there. You know, as far as tech and young people are concerned.
so?
I'm not sure it does.
That's where
I think the research is very inconclusive. In Cambridge, it would be Sander van der Linden. Sander van der Linden.
Sander van der Linden.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it certainly research is being done and it'll be continue to be
Very
done
popular.
and it absolutely.
Okay.
I'll
But
just
there
go
was a
time
famous-
as a timekeeper.
I'm
I've seen
getting
the
down.
number 0 for a little while, but yeah.
No, but you know, Roger Schenck, I don't know if you know that name.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, Schenck was writing exactly on this question. He even had a name, dependency. But he was talking about an older technology, but even doing the same thing we used to substitute for our thinking and our problem solving, we lost the skills that the very act of problem solving created. So this is an old point, and it's gotten even more important because of the fact that we now have such good ways to replace ourselves on certain tasks. But it doesn't mean that we can't restructure education to challenge individuals, right?
Yeah.
And to do exactly those tasks. It's a challenge though. So no longer could you just assign a paper and uncritically say, okay, turn in the paper, and if it's really good, I'm gonna give it a good grade. Now we know, oh, AI could have written it. I had a story myself, like last summer. I hired a very bright a high school student from Texas to work. He wanted to work. So he said it was fine. Very smart guy. He actually was very, he's actually coming to the University of Chicago, but as an undergraduate. So he's a very young guy. And so we interacted a lot, but he wanted to write a paper on risk aversion. And so I said, oh, fine, go ahead and write the paper. So he wrote the paper. And as soon as I got the paper, I looked at it, I said, well, this is quite impressive. It was really good. You said, really getting into all these areas. Then I really read the paper and I realized, wait, this paragraph doesn't connect to that paragraph, doesn't connect to that one. So he's using AI, and that's an example which you don't want. So I asked him directly, I said, look, come on, you didn't write this paper, right? No, he was honest, so we did. And so we lost the challenge to actually try to understand the technical material. So it's a task of academics now to really make sure that people are thinking, really thinking and doing the hard problem. And that's more personal education. But AI can help with that too.
But he also didn't realize that it was like you found it, right? So you have a mental model of what a paper looks like.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's too young.
Well, no, but yes, of course, but this is one of the big problems, even with computer coders.
Right.
So computer coders now are getting all this help from AI, and it's very helpful. If you've already got the skill with the mental model.
Correct.
But if the next generation, if they start from that, they won't have the mental model of what it's all about. Exactly. So they will think a paper is a bunch of paragraphs.
Exactly.
Rather than an argument.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm conscious that, as Eric says, we are just about there, really. Can I just ask, are there any other final points that anybody would like to make, just on the open floor basis? Any other points? Any other points? No? So do you think we?
I just one very short point. I do think a lot of this can be tested and researched into the practical way within the problem of unequal places, because in places like Sheffield and South Yorkshire, you've got these problems in spades. You've got able people, you've got people from care homes, you've got refugees, and you've got early childhood problems in spades. So, you know, this is where you can put these things together and bring the different variables together, in my opinion.
Sounds interesting. Okay. No other thoughts? Okay, well, can I just say a big thank you to all of you? I'm going to say a special thank you to Eric. But actually, really working so closely with us all the way through this, and Gareth and Tina. We've been coordinating on Zoom for the last 6 months or whatever it's been. It's been great to do that. Thank you to all the speakers who really made such a contribution. And I really look forward to seeing all your presentations up and running. And let's hope we can do this again sometime in the future. Thank you so much.